Support Narative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.
Hey everybody, welcome to Narrative Live. It's a big show tonight as opposed to a special show. I've noticed I say special show every time, but this one really is interesting. Hello to LB in LA, how are you? And Eric Garland's back.
Really well.
And how's Eric? Eric's good too, I hope.
Excellent.
We called the show Snake's Head because many people, when I ask them about what they think about Leslie Wexner and they are in the know, they tell me that he is the head of the snake, in reference to what could be an organized crime kind of syndicate. So we don't know that he is the head of a snake yet, but he could be, and that's why we're calling the show Snake's Head.
Could we hold on?
Yeah.
Since for the people just tuning in, he owns some clothing companies or something like that.
Some clothing companies.
Any,
you know, Leslie Wexner
anything anyone's heard of?
Well, one of them you may have heard of, called Victoria's Secret, I think. The other one is called Bath and Body Works. That's a good one. He also owned a bunch of others.
Okay. So we're talking about retail stores that the average person walks by in the mall. You're saying that the people behind that are a front for something far more nefarious than anyone could possibly imagine. Is that kind of what we're getting into tonight?
We're heading in that direction. I don't know if we've concluded that absolutely they are, but it certainly seems that there's a significant amount of evidence to suggest that they have a history where they could be involved in some organized criminal activity. But, you know, LB might feel more likely to say something more definitive.
Yeah, they're mobsters. Let's go.
Just to cut to the chase. All right. So we had a great interview today with. But this is important to underline that Leslie Wexner was very, very close to Jeffrey Epstein for many reasons, mostly for business, financial reasons. Some people say there could be other reasons, and we'll explore that later in the series. But these two people were very, very close to each other. Wexner comes from Ohio. He started his little company called The Limited then, or it was called Leslie's then, and it grew into this limited company. And it's a huge billion-dollar-plus company. He's a very, very wealthy guy, probably the wealthiest guy in Ohio. And he and Epstein ended up becoming good friends, and maybe more. So we spoke to Bob Fitrakis, who is a journalist who's been covering Wexner for decades, and he's really, really well informed about him. And Steve Hoffenberg was on the line as well. Now, as per usual with my audio mixing capabilities, I wasn't able to get everyone to hear each other at the same time. So sometimes you're hearing Bob Fitrakis say one thing and then Steve saying the same thing right afterwards. That's because they're actually just agreeing with each other without knowing that they're repeating each other.
They had no idea they were saying the same thing at the same time. It was incredible.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting when that happens. That's some serendipity.
That's incredible. Well, and Bob's really good at what he does.
Oh yeah, so really, really good at what he does.
This is a real journalist.
Support Narative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe and download.
I have no idea. I really don't. I don't know why that played, but there you go. It's partly because
it's a catchy tune.
It is a nice tune. You can find it on YouTube. It's royalty free too.
Okay, I'm finally in my comfortable chair, so it's okay.
This is why we do a live show, just to see how many mistakes I can do in a show, and then in the podcast it's all perfect. It's like it never happened. So here's part one of our interview with Bob and Steve about Leslie Wexner, and it's part one of Snake's Head. And what were they doing there? Do we have a sense of what they were doing at the Limited headquarters?
Well, I can tell you what the deceased County Sheriff Earl Smith told me and what David Sturtz told me. He said that Wexner had turned over his rolling stock and his warehouses to the mob, and that the mob was using them for a variety of things: illegal guns, gray market goods, drugs, a variety of illegal commodities.
So outside of, I'm sorry, for the back end of Victoria's Secrets and all these other brands that he had, was a gun running operation, an arms trading operation,
well,
and
a lot
drugs?
of that was coming out of Youngstown.
Right. Okay.
Right.
And they have little ports along the river there that are, some of them have international customs, where there was rumored to be a huge gun trafficking.
That's a very serious claim that I'm sure was under investigation if that's meritorious. I mean, that's major criminal misconduct, that kind of claim.
And it does sound like it has been investigated, Bob. Is that true, right? I mean, it has had a certain amount of investigation, never been ultimately proven in court, but has been investigated.
Well, the chief of police in Columbus destroyed the file. And the FBI turned over a copy to David Sturtz, the state inspector general. And he was fired soon after investigating the Shapiro murder file.
Wexner in general seems to have an outsized hold over power and the levers of power in Ohio. He seems to have seems to have control over every major office there. Is that a correct assessment?
Oh, absolutely. It's the like Al Capone soup kitchen, except he's got dozens of buildings with his name on it.
Right. And so any sort of investigation into any murder or any other crime related to Wexner would have just been swept under the carpet.
Well, I got 2 messages saying Jeffrey Epstein equals toe tag after I wrote the Shapiro murder story.
And when was that threat issued to you?
Wow.
Oh, it was 1997. And I went and asked the inspector general, and I talked to the county sheriff, Earl Smith, and both of them said that's coming from Jeffrey.
So Jeffrey himself, do you think?
Mr. Wexner doesn't operate that way.
So Mr. Wexner told them the threat was coming from Jeffrey. Wow. That also indicates that those two people were very close to each other. I mean, Jeffrey and Wexner were very close financially and in the business sense first, and we'll talk about the personal sense later. But they seem to be very, very engaged in all sorts of business. Is that your sense of it, Bob?
Absolutely. And everyone who knows Les Wexner said Jeffrey Epstein completely changed his personality. I mean, he was very low key, kind of shy, in the shadow. And then suddenly Jeffrey Epstein shows up and there's models everywhere. And, he's out in public and there's philanthropy and money's being moved all over the world.
And when was that? Let's land people in a date. Yeah.
Roughly, Epstein shows up around 85 in the Wexner circle.
This is about how the world of Jeffrey Epstein as an arms dealer with the leases could intersect the world of Leslie Wexner, who's doing apparel industry with some Teamster mobbed up trucking companies and a very mobbed up real estate developer. Okay. So, Bob, when did SAT come into the picture? When did we start getting former Air America, airlines, airstrips, all of that coming in to Ohio thanks to Leslie Wexner?
Mid-90s.
Okay, so there's some time.
And again, when you look at that whole development, they actually brought him in on state money. They gave him $25 million, and they were one of the best-known drug and arms dealers in the world. I mean, they were too hot for Miami.
Is there more that you can say in terms of how involved Epstein was in the organized crime piece of it?
The organized crime piece pre-existed because of the textile industry. You got everything from unions to planes coming in, large cargo planes. I mean, they went down the Rickenbacker and had a place for those planes to come in. And they're sealed. They're custom sealed. and they leave there because they've already been sealed, and they go off to the limited warehouses. Jeffrey early on was more into claiming he was tied to intelligence people, that he was kind of a bounty hunter, and that he worked for governments and very rich people. And there seemed to be an intersection of those two worlds when they got together. But Steve's absolutely right. Here's a general warranty deed where Jeff Epstein was sold or given 30 acres of land at the Wexner compound in the supposed guest house that originally was designed for Jack Kessler, the co-developer with Wexner. Prior to that, he had another house that was given to him that was smaller. But he ended up in the guest house, the second most expensive house in Franklin County.
So the guest house was the second most expensive house? Wow.
Yes, behind Les's.
Now, that house is actually also shrouded in some controversy itself, because Maria Farmer, who's one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, claims that she was basically held captive there for 3 months under the control of, apparently, Abigail Wexner, although she says she never met Les Wexner, even allowed to leave her that house without calling Abigail and getting permission. Are you familiar with that claim, Bob?
Well, I'm familiar of some of Maria Farmer's claims. And again, anyone who's been out there or knows about it, and I've had various people over the years, from masseuses to one of my former students who was a security guard, who would tell me it's long, lean, black Bentel month on the compound. So
which means what? What does that mean?
What she said made sense. Well, that's the hot models. Okay. Male lean black models or Victoria's Secret models. There was this, with Jeffrey coming aboard, there was this tremendous connection created between the models of the L brand and Mr. Wexner's compound. But what she said, as an artist, Les Wexner has always supported the arts substantially here in Central Ohio, arguably the greatest patron of the arts here. So when she said Jeffrey kind of recruited her for art and she's in the guest house, which he was controlling, her claims on that level make perfect sense. And she also talked about the dogs. I've seen the dogs. I've gone by that compound. In fact, the last time I went by that compound, I got to meet 2 detectives from New Albany's, 2 police in a cruiser and another police officer in an SUV. Both bridges, they told me, were out on either end. And they didn't look like they were out to me. But I told them I was going to New Albany Country Club, which is part of living in that upscale community. They didn't believe me.
So they block off bridges so people can't get access to this compound?
You go there and there's this very small creek on each side, which it's impossible to drown in unless you're committing suicide.
Right.
And, holding your own head down. But there was these 2 small bridges, which they claim, they had a sign up saying, when the scandal with Epstein broke, saying the bridges were out.
Oh, for that period of time. And so also they had sharpshooters apparently on top of buildings, according to Maria, it was that kind of security, not your typical
heavy
kind of
security.
So an indication
heavy and much armed, and also were fond of dogs. In fact, there's signs all over the fence because he loved these white picket fences to give it that Lexington horse country feel. And it's got the signs for beware of dogs, and you should be beware of them.
So it's the kind of security that is, you'd associate with someone like a criminal, like protecting their property.
It's a mob compound.
It's a mob compound. Thank you for saying that. I was trying to find a way to say it.
We got to call this stuff what it is.
Right. It's a mob compound. So that's part 1. Thank you, LB, for making it clear.
I'm very comfy. I got really comfy.
That was really, but great. It's exactly what we need to be doing, is to be speaking, absolutely plainly about what's going on. So, Eric, it's the first time you heard that interview. What are your thoughts about these part one? Oh, I can't hear you. I lost your microphone there, I think. Oh, no.
Oh, it's probably for the best.
Now you're back. Now here you are.
I just never thought the mall was that interesting. Behind the rack. I was there getting some good smelling hand cream, and the ladies are shopping for new skivs, and meanwhile at the compound with the snipers and military. Didn't that sound, that compound thing? Isn't that kind of where Ghislaine Maxwell was holding up in New Hampshire? By British mercenaries or something?
It has the same kind of feel of a very protected, militarily protected kind of place. Very unusual. I mean, certainly for an owner of a fashion brand, that would be very unusual to have.
Now
that kind
you said
of
mob, but I'm thinking like military intelligence too. They might put up a perimeter with, snipers.
Right.
But I mean, I've known people in the retail business. Yeah. My mom had a pie shop.
No snipers?
No snipers.
Okay. So let's actually fill in a little bit for the audience, because we were dropping some names. We're speaking with folks where we know the story, they know the story, they have information, we're filling it in, but the audience may not know some of these names. So you heard in there the name Robert Shapiro, or I'm sorry,
Arthur Shapiro.
Arthur Shapiro.
Yes.
Sorry. So that was a murder that is considered a mob hit of a man who was executed with 2 bullets, I think, in the back of his head as he was knocking on the door to get in.
It's quite a serious hit, yeah.
It was a very serious hit. It's the biggest sort of unsolved murder in Columbus. They're still trying to, it's very sensational there. Happened in 1985. And this man was the attorney for Leslie Wexner and for L Brands.
Amongst other companies. It wasn't exclusively working for them. Amongst
other companies, right. He was at a law firm, and this was this sort of big client. Obviously, this would be your biggest client. The next day, he was supposed to testify to a grand jury because the IRS had nabbed him. Funny how the IRS always shows up in organized crime. They know what they're doing. Just the right time. So he was going to get hauled in for not paying his taxes for like 7 years or so, but he had a big grand jury testimony, and people were very nervous about that. Supposedly, that's the reporting around it. And he was hit the night before he was going in, and so what came out of that investigation was information on Leslie Wexner as well. That behind Leslie Wexner were at least two big organized crime operations of the Genovese LaRocca crime family, which ended up being sort of the Philly crime family, but Genovese roots. And so you had, or what I call the Genovese, it's just easier to spell it online if you're searching to say Genovese in your head. But you had Walsh Trucking, which a couple years later was, after this hit, was taken down by RICO charges, just very mobbed up. And that was the Teamster stuff you heard us say, the Teamsters and the trucking company. Maybe you can make that out what I was saying. I had a really bad echo in my headset, so that's why I was talking a little weird there. And then the other one was DeBartolo's, who was a big construction company that was building these malls that Eric just talked about. That was just, it was just a Genovese company. Like those guys, I think they went to jail for fraud or racketeering or something. All this comes out in the years following this hit, which has never been solved.
Right.
Okay. And what we heard today, and maybe you'll have some of these later to play, and the reporting at the time from Bob, which was great, is that Epstein came into Wexner's life in 1985 and filled the role of Shapiro.
And that role, we should explain. What Shapiro's
That
role
role
was.
was setting up LLCs, setting up all of the all this sort of thing behind Leslie Wexner's brand that was probably laundering some money, but it most likely was about, when you're in bed with the mob, you've got to do your cuts, you got to do your splits, and so you want these shadow LLCs behind you that the profits can flow through, money can flow through, and a cut goes here, and a cut goes there, and a cut goes here, and so it's just sort of all this thing that happens through offshore accounts, and so Shapiro had already set that all up. That's known. And other things, right?
And Epstein was coming in basically to replace him in that role of establishing these LLCs and tax shelters.
Correct. Even though he wasn't an attorney, as far as I know, I don't think he ever got a law degree.
He did claim to be a tax expert. He did say that.
Whatever. I'm
so
sure
he
did. I'm sure he did. But he did get power of attorney from Leslie Wexner. So he did serve in that role, and that's sort of a known thing. And Hoffenberg goes on to say, Zev had to do this translation between the two of them because they couldn't hear each other in that shared interview. But Hoff goes on to confirm all of that. Oh yes, Epstein told him quite definitively that he had replaced Shapiro's role in Wexner's operation.
What you're seeing that's a great explanation, by the way. Thank you, LB. On the screen now as well, and basically the last minute while you were on the air there, is a diagram taken from the police hypothesis. I've never seen a police hypothesis before, but it's basically their theory of how the organized crime network plugged into the limited brands and into Victoria's Secrets. It's a little hard to make out there, but this was done in 1990, probably around then, looking back at the years between 1985 and 1990. Yeah, so you've got, and in the middle there, you can sort of make out the limited, and below that, you can see some of the organized crime families, like the Walsh Trucking is there, and then the Genovese family is below that at the very bottom there, and then up above there,
you say?
Trucking, yeah, waste management as well. Interesting. Yeah, it's sometimes connected, and at the top there you see all these other structures that they were doing. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. I was just going to say the FBI does these charts as well. The reason why the police had to piece this together, and it was sort of this theory that ended up being submitted to court, is because the documents were all destroyed. And the police that had actually, they had the investigators that had destroyed them. That's what Bob was going on to explain. Ended up getting charged for bribery counts. Like they were. Here's the thing about Ohio, and there's a great clip with Bob that maybe we'll play another day. It's not ready for today, where I have him sort of explain, because I don't think folks. This is why it's so important to really understand the underworld, really understand organized crime. Why I spend so much time going back to the beginning and telling you the story all the way back from the beginning, is that you guys think it's all just like, Italian families in the 5 boroughs of New York and maybe some Florida and Vegas, sure, because we saw those Scorsese movies, right? No, Ohio was as mobbed up as you can get from the very beginning, from the early 1920s, just mobbed to the teeth, because it's geographically positioned
right in the middle
for the bootlegging. Those lakes, right? And that's why Chicago was as well. And so the outfit crew was really Chicago, Steubenville, Cleveland, Youngstown, Columbus, and then kept going over into Philadelphia, right? It just was, that's how they drove their trucks.
Right.
So talking about trucking companies, they were driving their booze, and then the booze ended up being all these other things. So,
and then you needed a front, and the front might as well be Victoria's Secret. Why not?
You always need a business front, and the apparel industry, it basically was sort of, I have that horrible saying, which I won't say on air, so don't say it,
what it is,
Eric.
but okay.
Where things come flying out of the underworlds, right? They birth it, and the apparel industry is. I'm not going to say it. The apparel industry is one of those industries that it just was mobbed up from the beginning. I'm not saying that everybody in apparel is that. I'm just saying, just know the origins of that industry are completely intertwined.
The schmata business, as they say.
It is. Yes, they do say that.
It's the schmata
That's what it
business.
is.
It comes in and out, and you get things from here to there, and
Right.
So we should listen to part 2. But Eric, any other thoughts that you want to share with folks?
what else at the mall might be tied to foreign intelligence? Just off the top of my head, that's my one question.
So
Wow,
since we're,
can you imagine?
since we're pivoting to intelligence, you heard me say SAT in there.
Yes,
and
what was that?
Bob talked about airlines. So that's Southern Air Transport, was the former sort of Air America. It's hard to tell whether it was actually the former Air America airline, which was the CIA airline, or there just was sort of borrowed LLC and then new money coming into it. But it's all about the planes and the pilots, right? So the equipment. And so there were a couple of airlines that that are CIA airlines. I mean, they just are. It's just in their history. You can't escape it. And one of those was SAT. And so that's the airline that was connected with Leslie Wexner. He actually made it possible for them to have the airstrip, and built with his partners, developed all that stuff. So
they moved a lot of things, and they like to move things in various forms.
They were moving things. Yeah. They were moving things.
It's almost like Jeffrey Epstein, when you look at all the different things that he was involved in, somewhere between finance, science research and development, mob logistics, controlling politicians. It's almost like he was an intelligence operative of the highest possible order, hypothetically, if such a thing existed.
I mean, it certainly does look like that, because he fulfills the same role that Robert Maxwell did. Robert Maxwell did very much the same kinds of things, except he had a publishing empire. They did try to get a publishing empire by buying the Daily News at one point, or trying to. But at the end of the day, these guys operate in a very similar way. They lots of money, lots of arms, and you'll know better than anybody else, but is the amount of blackmail and amount of need for blackmail can only come from a state level. It can't possibly come just from an organized crime level, I would think. Well, maybe I'm wrong.
I just wouldn't underestimate organized crime.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh no! I mean, these guys share with each other on.
Yeah, I mean, you use the intelligence has a reason to be in there, because they're trying to find the bad guys, right? And bad guys do business with other bad guys, and so this is how you catch the bad guys. But
don't underestimate the organized crime. That's a good way of thinking of it.
Just don't underestimate it. Don't underestimate once they do know that they're in business with some global fucketeer, some arms dealer, something. And a lot of this stuff is legal, by the way. It's just really dirty business, but it's not like arms dealing is 100% illegal, or it's just horrible. But these people get contracts. They
got to eat.
It's a business, and so if you're in that and you get caught doing some criminal shit, one way to get out of that is to offer up a bigger criminal that you might be in business with over here. And so that's where it gets all blurred and mixed up, and you think someone's an intelligence operative, but they're just a confidential informant. They're just handing names over so they can get out of their own crimes.
I was wanting to explain this with one chart here that I've just pulled up, because in those few years between 1982 and 1987, Jeffrey Epstein got to meet all these people that really were influential in his life, whether it's Ghislaine Maxwell in 1982, Adnan Khashoggi, also 1982, you can't really see it there. 1987 was Thomas Barack, also Trump was 1987, and Wexner was between 1985 and 1987, and Hoffenberg was 1987. So he comes out of doing all these arms trades in the Middle East, in Europe, but involving the Middle East, and he comes back to America, and he suddenly got this incredible network of some of the richest, most powerful people in America, and he's ready to do business, which is also quite an impressive feat, and must have come along with some sort of help from somebody. So let's take a listen to part 2. And this is a little longer, but really interesting. And we'll follow up on the other side of this.
I had a sense people that live there, Mr. Wexner, greatly cherish their privacy unless they wanted you there.
Right, right.
And he was one of the most he was clearly, I think, the most protected person in Ohio.
Sounds like the most protected person in the United States. That's a hell of
Could
a lot of
be.
security. So, Steve, Bob is painting a picture of someone who clearly operates and looks like a mobster, or a criminal in any event, and also a lot of crime activity related to human trafficking potentially. If we look at Maria Farmer's claims that she was held captive there for 3 months in the home adjoining the Wexner home, which was Epstein's home.
Maria Farmer has produced a document for evidence of a driver's license issued to that address, to the address of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell's use on that parcel of land attached to the Wexner parcel of land. And Maria Farmer, who is tragically hurt and is in the hospital today under continuing care for cancer from this claim, states that she was held there for months against her will by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and she claims that Abigail Wexner had a participation in this, but that was kind of indirect in a way, and that would have to be looked at as a very serious claim.
Well, especially Bob is describing it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I believe that Wexner at the time was the richest man in Ohio for a number of years and still is, and he was highly protected in this palatial estate compound that he erected in New Albany, Ohio, for himself. It was a monstrous place, huge, the most expensive place in Ohio, and heavily protected with guard dogs and armed security. So that's what Maria Farmer said, that security was on, that the guard dogs were ferocious, and she was unable to go outside and unable to run away. That's her claim, that she was held against her will for this period of time.
Bob also
Which
says
appears to be a valid claim. It's a valid claim because she's reported it. She reported it then, she reported it contemporaneously ongoing to the incident. So there's been a lot of validation for that claim.
Yeah, and Bob describes a very similar sort of environment there. He also says there was other models and people related to the Victoria Secret and other brands that also used that property, that compound as well. Now, we don't know if that's a human trafficking event or what that was, but are you familiar with anything like that?
I am familiar with Ohio being well known under that problem of crime, of trafficking. Yes, that's been reported that there is trafficking in Ohio, and it's a serious question of law and order in Ohio. And I believe that's what Bob is saying to you. It's a law and order problem in Ohio right now and was then.
He also points to these airlines that Epstein's appeared to operate on behalf of Wexner.
Epstein was very much a mastermind on how to manipulate the law to his favor, and how to rig the law. That was his specialty, on how to rig the system. And that's what Bob is talking about, the rigging of the system, which there's no question was rigged to advantage Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and now today's show is hearing linkage of claims to Leslie Wexner. which you're explaining to the listeners. Very dramatic show.
It is very dramatic because
program.
he's up until recently, Wexner has still been considered a bit of an icon in terms of his fashion brands, but also as a business leader and his connections to Israel, and also his work as a philanthropist. So it's Israel that I want to go to next, because one of the relationships that's so interesting between Wexner and Epstein is the one with Ehud Barak, because as late as 2004, if my recollection is right here, Epstein gives Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, $2.4 million for some sort of research, and he does it on behalf of the Wexner Foundation because he was running the Wexner Foundation at the time. Now, it's pretty unusual, I think, for anyone to get a check for $2.4 million for sort of unknown research, but maybe he's just giving a donation to the former prime minister of Israel. But it does seem then that some of that money might have gone on to be invested in a startup called Carbon, which is a sort of, some people suspect, a surveillance startup in the United States. And it comes out of Israel, but is now being implemented in the United States. That whole circumstances of Epstein being a Wexner Foundation trustee and then handing over this large amount of money to Ehud Barak, and then he partners with Ehud Barak in Carbon, is sort of where the speculation that something really untoward was happening. Are either of you aware of that particular series of events?
Yeah, one of the things I'm aware of is that the Wexner Foundation was involved in selling the Iraq War. They hired Frank Lutz on how they could sell the attack on Iraq to the American people, which I found interesting. I wrote an article called Wexner's War, but also when you look at that period, it's also Wexner's royal connection. A man named Nigel Rosser called me up with the Evening Standard, claiming to have an access to the Queen of England, and asked me about Wexner being tied to the intelligence community because he believed Epstein was tied and was doing foreign policy favors. So that was his theory. But he also said Epstein was going on vacation, that Miss Maxwell had gone on vacations with Prince Andrew 9 times, and Jeffrey was along on 5 of them.
That I think has been borne out to some extent. But go back to this Mr. Russell.
Let's go back to Nigel.
Nigel Rosser. And there was an article that's since been scrubbed, but I referred to it in my article that I wrote back around 2003. It's called Wexner's Royal Connections.
Interesting. And so he was calling on behalf of the Queen, or knew the Queen? Or?
He said he was a confidant of the Queen.
And the Queen was
and
trying
I
to
don't know
figure
whether he was bragging.
Right.
But he was giving me information. Vicky Ward said, "You realize you're the first journalist that wrote about Epstein and Prince Andrew." But I got it from this guy, Nigel Rosser, who was investigating it, who gave it to me because he knew I would publish it if I could verify it.
When?
2003.
Okay.
So, but why would the Queen would need to call you to find out if Wexner was?
I think he was just saying, "Look,
he was somebody.
I have the Queen's connection." Yeah, I don't know who he was. All I knew is I looked it up, and he did write for a tabloid. His name was Nigel Rosser.
I have it here in my archives. I'm going to try and look it up while we're talking. But it is interesting that that the Queen was sort of, if it's true that the Queen was inquiring about whether Wexner was involved, it would have meant that she would not have known as late as 2003 that he was.
I don't buy that.
Well, Nigel wanted to know. He said I think the Queen was just to scare Jeffrey or the Prince away from Jeffrey. I think that was that agenda.
Okay.
I don't think the Queen wanted to know. I think she's got MI6 if she wants to know that.
We are aware that that he was an Israeli agent, at least for Israeli military intelligence, as was Ghislaine Maxwell.
You mean Jeffrey Epstein?
Jeffrey Epstein was, yes. I was about to ask the question. So was Wexner, we're looking at a circumstances where he was involved, at least in lobbying on behalf of the state of Israel and influencing policy in the United States on behalf of the state of Israel. Is there any indication that Wexner himself was an agent of the state of Israel? No.
No. I think what he's done diplomatic stuff. He was real good friends with Max Fisher, who used to do backdoor diplomacy during the Ford years. And those were his connection. Too. And he was one of the people who was there for the 60th anniversary of Israel. And there was some indication that he was one of the major private donors to Israel. But he was more in that diplomatic connection. And I think that came from his mentor, Max Fisher.
Interesting. Okay. So back to the Ehud Barak thing, so Epstein handing over $2.3 million to Ehud Barak. Is that unusual? Is that something you found as being, not typical of Wexner, or is that something he would have done through his foundations?
Oh, they ran tremendous amounts of money. And a lot of people don't really look at the Columbus Foundation. When I was looking at it, the Wexner Foundation didn't have as much money as the Columbus Foundation, which was an older foundation. They kind of took over because it had more cachet. It went back to World War II. But at one point, Epstein was the number 3 donor, and there were hundreds of millions of dollars in donations. It was Wexner, his mother, Bella, and then Jeffrey Epstein. And it was Columbus Foundation. Yeah. And he pretty much bought up the arts in Central Ohio.
He certainly has a great art collection.
You say nice things about Mr. Wexner. There's a lot of money coming out of there. And there's a lot of people I know I used to consider a friend who warned me I should leave Mr. Wexner alone. And I also know they were getting money from the foundation.
Interesting. He also still got in the way of when Bella died. Is it true that Jeffrey Epstein caused a rift in the family? Oh, sorry, she was in hospital, I think. While she was in hospital, he was able to get her removed from the board as a trustee.
Yeah, that was thought to be related to Les. But the story itself, that's him being the fixer henchman, right? Leslie doesn't want to do the dirty work with his mom to control that money. So you bring in your pit bull and Lady Friday.
Right.
And there's no doubt that Leslie Wexner was and is a major benefactor for the country of Israel. Has been an advocate for the country of Israel for decades. Very deep in their political system, and has been. And that's what made Jeffrey Epstein increase his traction and ability to operate in Israel. It's remarkable what happened.
Now, we've also heard that Wexner had some sort of either direct feed of what was going on inside the Epstein household, which is also the Wexner home in Manhattan, that he was able to access in Ohio. Are you aware of that?
What has been said by some eyewitnesses is that these taping systems, making the films of the raped girls with the officials, with the rich and powerful and famous people, that it was transferred electronically to Wexner. That's been said, that Ghislaine Maxwell was the administrator of the taping system that transferred the tapes to Ohio. Yes.
So was it a live feed or was it a tape transfer system? Just for
a tape, not a live feed from the 5 locations, but a transfer of the tapes to Ohio.
Okay.
Yes,
she's sending signals.
Where Ghislaine Maxwell made her set of copies, and the exiled Palm Beach detective made his set of copies from.
All right. So LB,
Yes.
you were going to jump in there with a blunt assessment of what that is.
She's sending signal. If that's true, okay, if that's true, she's sending signals over a sophisticated system. I don't think she's the one who set that up. I'm very curious as to whether Wexner had that set up before Jeffrey came into the house to begin with, which speaks to Wexner's connections and abilities. But that's early signals and intelligence. I don't know what else to call about it. Like they're sending signals, they're sending packets. Okay. And that allows anybody else, like a foreign intelligence agency, like Amman, like all these, you know, at the Kremlin, they have their places, to be able to intercept those packets. That's how it works.
And even just the tape transfer, even if it's just mailing tapes, those are tapes of crime.
That's not as good.
It's a crime in its own.
If she's sending signals, right? She's doing that so they can be plucked.
Oh, so you're saying that there was a tape system potentially that also was then transmitted. There were tapes and then those were transmitted. Does anyone actually know
what he's saying is they recorded it.
Yeah.
And then she had a system through which she sent that.
Right.
Right? I don't think we're talking physical tapes. We're not talking physical tapes.
Are we talking about physical
signal.
tapes or Steve, or were they sending tapes or were they just transmitting the video?
The time frame would be the question as to what was available electronically, if they could transfer electronically at that particular year or not. But this did go on for quite a long timeline. But these are very hot issues that you're covering in today's program. Very serious issues.
They are. They're very
very serious. Very important to Ghislaine Maxwell.
Very important.
In her talks with the Southern District of New York going on this minute. These are very important points.
What does Bob know? Bob knows something.
Well, if you go back to the mid 90s with the Architectural Digest, when they talked about Jeffrey living in the mansion there in New York, and, you know, were these for security or were they for other things? But I know the Inspector General later on, after he had left office, was always obsessed that Wexner was using this one small company in Central Ohio. And there was also, before he died, speculation that that guy had gone down to Jeff's Island and had been involved in installing these sophisticated systems. So I'm thinking the mid-90s was tapes, if they're transmitting or some sort of satellite. But I would be surprised if they didn't go more high-tech in the later years.
So interesting.
What company?
I'd have to look it up in my. I was just talking about it the other day. I'm going to have to pull that up.
Okay.
It'd be great
But
if
it
you shared
was
that.
one firm they used a lot. And
One
it
firm
was
they used a
strange
lot.
because they used them in New Albany, and it was reported. And again, I haven't verified that the company had also worked on the island.
And now that it would be really interesting to know what they
I
did.
don't think there were physical tapes.
I know on the island they actually built.
I mean, I think they could make copies.
There was a stream.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I'm
think they're
thinking
sending
at the
packets.
end. At least that would be my bet.
Would you mind coming back on, Bob and Steve, and continuing this conversation? Because there's so much
come
more.
on, because you're the only guy that wants to look at the organized crime and intelligence aspect.
You need to share this with your audience substantially.
So that's interesting. Very, very interesting, because it really changes the dynamic. I'm just, are you a little bored? A little tired?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
nothing happened there.
no.
So it's really
Just a
fascinating.
little little compromise mob SIGINT operation that you walk by at the mall. It's all normal.
It just happens every day. But really what we're talking about, and you did a great job explaining it there, LB, is a massive distribution network for this blackmail content, that it wasn't just like, oh, I'll give you a tape and, in a hidden folder somewhere. That potentially people were receiving, and this is potential, we don't know the full infrastructure, but potentially people were receiving around the world, whoever was maybe paying or wanting to receive it, could get it off the signal and by intercepting it. Is that what you're ultimately saying? You're muted. I think you're muted.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
So sorry. It's going to depend on the year. And the years that this, right? It's going to depend on verifying this. The idea that anything that might be a physical tape was something that could have been a copy or something that somebody could have is always what we had thought was going on. This is really, except for in the island, there had been speculation and reporting around that he had been setting up some kind of satellite, some kind of transfer system, some kind of pipe going, getting established there. This is the first time I heard that they were sending shit back to Ohio. And I don't think they're saying there was a FedEx package on wall striking, right? That with some physical tapes, they're talking about sending it over.
And one doesn't preclude the other. They could have tapes and a distribution.
What may I say?
But if it's a signal, if they're sending signals, then it's not that.
It's just frozen.
Anything that's happening.
You're back there. Sorry, I'll be off for a second there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. Think of it the other way. So think of it, our signal collection agency, right? Collecting signals in other nations, right? If they know or they hear about there's some kind of human intelligence or something they're already on top of where they know signals are being sent, they can intercept that.
Right.
That's what they do. It's just it's very sophisticated, but in the most basic terms, that's what's going on. So if these private intelligence folks were sending, it depends on the year, because then we can know the level of sophistication. But if they're sending that compromising content electronically, as Steve said, it's the wrong word. That's the wrong word too. But just so you can think about it in your own head, if they're sending it, holy shit!
Who has that?
Can I jump in with a little?
Yeah, go for it, Eric.
A little intel. Normally at this point, I would do like an all caps thing. I don't want to freak the mics out, but doing signals intelligence on U.S. soil is bad. That's dumb. We're good at that. The NSA is really good at that. So
we have to verify this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean but this would be the kind of thing that would be, top secret for a long time. So, which makes this kind of a huge story. It's kind of amazing.
I mean, there's always been this notion that there's some sort of national security threat by revealing the details of the Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell story. And maybe this is one of those things, is there's so much potential blackmail material out there or signals intelligence out there that is being used, at least, that could be a challenge.
I want to be careful with that term too, because that's really reserved for our agencies and professionals.
Right.
I don't know what you want to call this.
Distribution of, let's say satellite distribution, if you want to call it that. But it's still,
we're not going to know the technology. We're not going to know the technology. That's the part that's going to be that the FBI is going to have. But my thought is that you've got three. You're talking about two nuclear armed powers. If this is the 80s and 90s, you got Russia, you got the United States, the old adversaries,
and the 2000s.
And it never stopped. 1917 to present, right? You just get different technologies in there. But by the 80s, it's very clear you know, you've got Israel's got a role that is not entirely clear, which anyone in geopolitics will tell you, but you get into the weeds like this and you know why that's an understatement. But you're talking, you know, why would that remain top secret? Well, just for so many reasons. But you're talking about a very tense balance between just those three nations, you know, with all their complicated backstory, and these things are happening behind the scenes that, you know, you almost understand why, you know, perhaps there were many reasons for either Epstein to want to kill himself or people to want him dead or whatnot. We're over a serious freaking target here. So,
I mean, clearly a very big operation. I was struck by the, sorry, go ahead.
This is where you're like, it better be just physical tapes. They better not have been doing that. I mean,
it seems to me that there were definitely physical tapes, because
like
the police department, the Palm Beach Police Department had a mole, at least a suspected mole, that was that fled to Russia right after the Epstein arrest, and that guy is suspected of being someone who had access to those tapes. So he is suspected of having actual tapes, but that does not mean that there was also not a transmission system available for Wexner and whomever else may have wanted to take a look at those things.
Why are they sending it to Ohio? Why do you
That's
need
my
to
question.
do that?
Why do they? What's your best guess on this?
Why do you need to do that?
Why?
So that you could say it's being sent now.
All right.
Give me $14 million and I'll tell you how. Oh my God. What was she doing? What was this woman up to?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Maria Farmer talks about thousands of girls being human trafficked through their mansion.
I know that feels really
thousands
of girls, and so yet only 30 or 40 have ever come forward. And so that's kind of really an interesting ratio. You'd think even now, after his death, there would be a lot more people coming forward, and it doesn't seem to be that there are. So what, you know, how have people kept quiet, and what's going on?
I don't know. There's some kind of scaling problem here between the reality of it and all of the information circling around it. And that always, for me, that just makes it like, why are people trying to sensationalize this in a particular direction? It feels like they don't want something else to be seen. I don't know, because I can't go with the thousands. That doesn't.
I mean, she was there. She describes a year there where she said there was just girls every day, all the time, in and out.
That doesn't mean that's all. You know, I don't know.
That likely was. You know, so where do these girls? You know, girls just don't show up at some billionaire's home, and I mean, it just seems unlikely the teenage girls are just showing up there. So what are they? It's potentially human trafficking of some sort. And so to whom are they being trafficked? Where's the blackmail? And if there is blackmail, why have we never actually had a blackmail case come out? Like, no one's ever said, I've been blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. I know the reasons why legally you'd land up in court yourself, but it's we have such limited information still about even that part of the case.
Yep.
Any other thoughts that came out of that section for you guys?
That was a lot.
While we were listening to it, the Maxwell files are out on Pacer.
And they are
downloaded as we speak. So.
Oh, it's interesting timing. They must have waited for the show, so that'll be interesting to read. Those also involve this very same group of people, because I think in there is Alan Dershowitz's deposition, where he describes how Virginia Giffrey slept with him in order to confirm or to at least tip off Wexner that he was going to be blackmailed by this operation. That's Dershowitz's explanation. I don't buy it for a second because it's Dershowitz, but at least that's what he says happened. And Virginia Giffrey is the person who was raped by both Wexner and Dershowitz, and Prince Andrew, actually.
I mean, if we're talking about hundreds of human beings harmed this way, this needs to go to The Hague. This is international crime against humanity.
And we don't subscribe to the Hague anymore, right? I mean, didn't they just pull out of the international court into the international court?
I'm not considering any recent policy by these mobbed up.
And it doesn't necessarily only include Americans.
I really hope that our friends, friendly nations for us, weren't running this the whole way through. Because I do think that needs to be sorted out and illuminated, and we need to, look, the way things were done in the last century, even all the way up to the very last gasping seconds of it, we can't do things that way anymore. We just can't. And it's not just, we just can't.
I don't think it's going to come out. I think the chances of it coming out are very, very slim, because I just don't see anyone seeing the imperative to do it from a national security perspective. From a criminal justice perspective, absolutely. But I don't see how this part of that whole espionage piece is going to be able to find its way into court. I find it very hard to believe that can even be tried in court in a traditional way. But I don't know.
The victims can sue.
Right.
Yeah, they could do what the survivors, the victim family of 9/11 have done with Saudi Arabia. And so, and we have presidents and very powerful, very knowledgeable people who know way more about all this stuff than we do, who don't like that. They don't like that approach of suing other nations for their involvement in criminal acts here. I don't agree. I think this kind of
we have to.
Garbage, this kind of garbage has to stop. It just has to stop.
Yeah, because otherwise we just have a two-tier system, and it's not acceptable.
Here's the other thing: is then we battle these criminal acts. These are thugs. These are criminals. This is a crime syndicate that got their hands on spy shit and ran gross things. But how much better off are we if we go after them like the organized crime syndicates and the thugs that they are, instead of thinking, this is a nation state, let's go to war. And it's counterintuitive, but if you remove the nation state out of that scenario, like, stop fucking supporting these fucking thugs over here. Stop funding gangsters, mobsters. Stop funding these syndicates. Then we can prosecute those syndicates for what they are, instead of launching ourselves into wars or whatever. I mean, it would be much better.
LB, it's funny you mentioned that, because that's one of the things that's so amazing when you see some of the indictments that are dropping of recent, things that, to my knowledge, stay so tightly inside the counterintelligence world, like what we just had with Chinese economic espionage, where we've sued two human beings who are hackers, who have stolen hundreds of millions of dollars of United States intellectual property. And in the indictments, known to a grand jury in the United States, are officers of the Ministry of State Security, MSS, that's China's intelligence service. This is right there with suing the Putin's chef IRA guys, the contractors doing spy work, and going after the individual officers in the GRU and the Russian intelligence for hacking and messing with our election. That's never happened before. We're actually we are doing this thing you just asked. We're seeing the examples of this. This is like, no, if you're not just harming this country. This isn't just about nations, even though they're statecraft. This is, you're reaching through into people's computers. You're taking their daughters. There are individual crimes here. You're stealing their ideas. And if you commit those crimes, and now we all carry little supercomputers in our pockets, and we have all this forensic stuff that nobody had in the 1950s or 70s, 30s. not even the 80s and 90s. We have it now, though. And man, if you're screwing around with computers and internet and you're committing crimes, even if you're tied to an intelligence service, which normally would be hush hush, our DOJ, even under this scumbag Bill Barr and Donald Trump, even with all that, we are dropping indictments on people that are spy mobsters. Mobster spies are just crooks, and they're wrapped into that world.
Yeah. There's a big
but
difference.
either way, if you commit a crime,
monster spies are different. Yeah.
You commit a crime, we kind of don't care what it says on your paycheck. Come here. You committed a crime against these people in Washington State. We're in the Eastern District. Come here, scumbags.
It's interesting you're mentioning Bill Barr, because he wasn't in favor, obviously, of the Ghislaine indictment. He wasn't in favor of that arrest. It was only Jeffrey Berman who pushed him into that corner after Berman was fired. I mean, that's the only reason we're here today with Ghislaine Maxwell facing those charges and with all this other activity. Yeah, so
he saved the indictment.
He really did, and that arrest is going to fundamentally change, I think, how we handle these things going forward.
I hope so. Yeah, I just the bigger conversation being, stop using mobsters to run your shit. Stop it. Stop using crime syndicates as part of your intelligence operation.
But maybe this is how things have been all along. Maybe this is exactly how things have been for centuries.
It's been this way for a very long time.
That there are organized crime elements that are part of the state.
Trump, but
maybe that's just the way it is. Maybe that's the way states function.
Okay, well, hold on. I mean, we got to go.
I don't know part of the state, but they're used. They're used.
Well, allowed to operate within a state or alongside a state.
Stop using them.
But that's maybe the way this world has worked forever. Maybe that's, there's always been a dirty tricks operation for every government.
Well, they came into existence together. Mm-hmm. If you study the history, that's what it is.
The intelligence agencies and the organized crimes.
You cannot take Elizabeth Friedman out of the relationship, out of Carlos Marcello. You can't do that. You can't separate Meyer Lansky, Longy's Willman, right? Lucky Luciano, Carlos Marcello, from Elizabeth Friedman. You can't. And I know those are names that people might not know. And you're just listening to this podcast fresh. Why don't you go Google Elizabeth Friedman, and you'll find out that that's truly the godmother of signal intelligence and what became the NSA. Her work. She's a heroine.
And that was when? Give me a date for that kind of thing to happen.
It was bootlegging. It was the 20s.
20s. So fairly recent.
Right.
But before that, even for, if I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of years
ago,
for centuries, there have been government, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, agencies, operators that go and do, things that are not right. Yeah. And those things are, that's the way things have been forever. So why can't it just, that's the way it has been. And it doesn't mean it has to continue to be that way, but maybe that's the way the system has run for so long.
The underworld is the underworld. I don't know what to say.
Dodgy people are dodgy people. There's a lot of history behind it.
Yeah. So have you had to look at the Pacer files that have been downloaded, or is it too much?
Yeah. What's going on?
Well, let me get into it.
All right. By the way, I should point out this one little article from, unless you've got it right up there. If you're ready to go, I won't riff. But if you want me to fill a few minutes, I can. Are you ready to talk, or Eric?
About the
what you've got in the.
I have no. I'm busy doing the show. There's
okay. So you haven't had a chance to look. Okay. So we're going to get into it in a second, but let me show you a couple of things then quickly. This is from where is it? Sorry. So many buttons to press. Interesting. Okay, I can't find this slide I was looking for in particular. Oh, let me put it on here.
I'm just looking. I'm looking right now for.
This was a description in the New York Times about the Wexner and ultimately Epstein mansion that was at 71st Street. And in this description, it describes a bathroom reminiscent of James Bond movies, hidden beneath a stairway, lined with lead to provide shelter from attack and supplied with closed-circuit cameras. It's such an incredible description of a place that is just a mansion, just a home in New York City that has all this a bomb shelter,
and
like
yet not.
Yeah, and yet not. But
And yet not.
It's the only reference from early on that we have of their closed circuit cameras that have been, in an official newspaper or a mainstream media source, if you like, that there was these closed circuit cameras, that they did actually exist within that mansion. And since then, Maria Farmer and others have confirmed that that's in fact the case. We know that some tapes have been discovered, but this was the earliest sort of official reference. It was basically a reference to the architecture of the place. But it's great to have that on the record.
Okay, I'm going to read something. I believe this is one of the document segments, again, coming from Soy Chica, who's deeply into all these documents, where she's saying one of the parties who helped negotiate Epstein's NPA, non-prosecution agreement, was also a co-conspirator. I mean, that leaves like one name, but it's redacted, the name. But here are the locations. And this is the excerpt. One such powerful individual that Epstein forced then minor Jane Doe 3 to have sexual relations with was redacted, a close friend of Epstein's, redacted. Epstein required Jane Doe 3, blah, blah.
Just got to be Prince Andrew.
I don't know. While she was a minor, not only in Florida, but also on private planes in New York, New Mexico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands.
I mean, it has to be. It has to be Prince Andrew. I mean, I'm guessing, obviously, but it sounds like that.
But why would later play a significant role in negotiating the non-prosecution agreement on Epstein's behalf?
Because he did. So he did that. He put a lot of pressure on. He was one of the main reasons that Epstein got off.
Is there going to be a prince in
I think there's a prince in there.
I
mean, I'm guessing. I don't know. But the other parts of that Giffrey court case, there's specific reference that Giffrey was concerned that Andrew was using his influence to get a non-prosecutor's agreement or prosecution agreement for Epstein.
Whoever is redacted, here's the line. Indeed, redacted helped negotiate an agreement that provided immunity from federal prosecution in the Southern District of Florida, not only to Epstein, but also to, quote, any potential co-conspirators of Epstein. So we knew that was a non-prosecution agreement, but they're saying one of the rapists in all these locations and was a close friend of Jeffrey's that also negotiated that agreement.
Well, I can't think of anybody else actually that in my research that it would be, because it's so hard to negotiate a prosecution agreement with anybody if you're not involved in the case.
Could be Dershowitz. We don't know.
Yes, it could be Dershowitz. You're right. But he was already named in the case. I'm not sure he would have been able to negotiate it, but maybe you're right. It's interesting that around that time is that article that Bob was referencing by Nigel Rosser. That came out just before, like that became actually in 2001. And it does reference, these many vacations that Ghislaine went on with Andrew. And of the 8 vacations that they went on, Jeffrey Epstein was on those vacations with them. So, it's interesting that Ghislaine was close to Andrew, but so was Epstein.
I think, look, we gotta, it can be a show that's all speculation. We had some
We're
really
speculating
great
right now.
Drop.
Yeah.
We had some really great information drop. I'm frozen again. We had some really great information drop, but we just need we just need to go through these documents, and then facts need to come out. Facts need to come out in the case.
What other documents were put out there today?
I think the whole.
It was just 5, I think.
The whole Pacer drop.
Okay. Oh, that's gonna be a lot. There goes my night. All right. Well, let's leave it there then. Is there anything else I'd like to show you guys? This is interesting. Abigail Wexner is an interesting character. I looked up their marriage announcement.
She is.
And
we're going to have to learn more from Bob about her.
We're going to have to learn more from Bob. Yeah. Do you think so? Do you think he's done a lot of research into her? Here's the announcement. It's from the New York Times on January the 24th, 1993. And he was 55 at the time, getting married for the first time. And she was 31. Jeffrey was a constant companion during the time before that and and during that time of their marriage, and he stayed good friends with everybody there. And there's an interesting background there.
We're going to have to learn from Bob.
Yes, we're going to have to learn from Bob. Which I'm following that. All right, so that's it for the show. Thanks very much for joining us, guys, and we will be back with another show tomorrow night when we'll be discussing some of this, plus other excerpts from this. And we don't have a special guest tomorrow, but Greg Oliar will be here, so he's always special. And so we'll see you tomorrow, and thanks very much for joining us on Narrative tonight.
Hi, thanks.
Support Narrative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download.